our study is going to focus on Romans 1 through 17. And you've heard me say in the past several weeks that, especially for me, I like to spend a lot of time in 18 through the balance 32 of the chapter. And that's because when people ask me, why do bad things happen to good people? Well, Romans 1 and the end of the chapter is really my go-to to say, this is why awful stuff happens. Because if I'm going to wrap it up, I'm going to say that the author here, who we know to be Paul because he identifies himself, the author here says that the Lord, recognizing that we would rather, and we being mankind, would rather worship the creations of the Creator, let us do that. And then in such a way, let us also then begin to develop desires for debauchery and lechery, etc., because we didn't want to have a relationship with our Creator. We'd rather worship the stuff He created as opposed to having a relationship with Him. So it's real easy that that's my go-to when I want to talk about why is sin so rampant? Why does the world look the way that it looks today? Why is the culture so messed up? But what I want us to spend time on is Romans 1 through 17, because that's actually the therefore in terms of why the rest of the chapter. And we don't spend a lot of time on this, and that's where our study is going to be. So let's read through this. Paul, and I'm reading from the NIV, a servant of Christ Jesus, called to be an apostle and set apart for the gospel of God. The gospel he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures regarding his son, who after his earthly life was a descendant of David, and who through the Spirit of holiness was appointed the Son of God in power by his resurrection from the dead, Jesus Christ our Lord. Through him we receive grace and apostleship to call all the Gentiles to the obedience that comes from faith for his name's sake. And you are also among those Gentiles who are called to belong to Jesus Christ. To all in Rome who are loved by God and called to be his holy people, grace and peace to you from God our Father and from the Lord Jesus Christ. First of all, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is being reported all over the world. God, whom I serve in my spirit in preaching the gospel of his Son, is my witness how constantly I remember you in my prayers at all times. And I pray that now at last, by God's will, the way may be open for me to come to you. I long to see you so that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to make you strong. That is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that I planned many times to come to you, but I have been prevented from doing so until now, in order that I may have a harvest among you, just as I have had among the other Gentiles. I'm obligated both to Greeks and non-Greeks, both to the wise and the foolish. That is why I'm so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. I am not ashamed, memory verse for one is, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. For in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith, from first to last, just as it is written, the righteousness will live by faith. And so that introduction of righteous and righteousness is the pivot that then becomes the basis for 18 and through the rest of this chapter. But what I would draw your attention to, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on the scripture, but I want you to see it as the foundation. There's a lot of information here that begins with Paul, a servant of Christ, called to be an apostle and set apart for the gospel of God. And in this, he uses a lot of key words that in many ways, we Westerners, we especially Americans, are probably not so comfortable using in our regular everyday lives, in addition to practicing in our everyday lives. So one of the things that jumps out for me here is, and again, I'm just going to mention a couple of these words, but we'll do all of the verses in depth as we get there. But because of maybe how humans operate, we're going to kind of come in through the back door to better understand the chapter, as opposed to just going through the big, huge Bible, scripture, scary verses and terms. But what I want you to see here is bondservant. I want you to see servant. I want you to see the apostle, obligated. And then also key that's in verse 16 is this: I'm not ashamed of the gospel. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. So let's jump into our discussion And perhaps by reading the scripture, you'll at least get some understanding of where we're heading, because maybe we need to first examine ourselves in order to better understand how Paul can get to the point where he can write this and write it being truthful about what he is, whose he is, and what he's about. So the first questions for today seem to be similar. So here's the first questions. And let me read them both, but let's focus on each separately because they're two different things. So what causes you personally embarrassment, and what causes you personally shame? So let's start with embarrassment. And I'm asking you all the question. So looking for you all to help populate the answers to this question. What causes you embarrassment?
Saying stupid stuff.
Love it.
And I can also
I get
say, because I've
embarrassed.
done this when I trip and fall down like a curb, because I've done that twice now. So yes.
Only twice? In your
Yes.
entire life, only twice?
Well, only twice that caused me to have cast on my feet because I dislocated my ankles.
Oh,
So yeah.
Okay. I get embarrassed in work because on occasion, and more so than I'd like for it to happen, I will miss something that I should have caught in the work I've presented to people. And I have to go back and basically say, oh, I'm sorry, that's my bad. I needed to not have done that or have added that in there, one of the two. I get embarrassed with that. That to me is it's like I knew better. I knew to check for that. I might even thought about checking for that, but did not. So that's one that embarrasses me quite a bit.
Can we put a bow on that and maybe call it making mistakes?
Oh yeah, well, the reason this is embarrassing because it's oftentimes a whole group of people I've prepared work for, and so it's not just one person that is really understanding, but a group of people that, well, I guess Gene's not the guru we thought he was, and actually I have people calling me that, which is kind of strange, but they actually, I get embarrassed and I'll go, I knew better than that. So yeah, but it is mistakes, but these are rather public mistakes, and maybe that's the big deal.
Okay, so let's call it making mistakes in the public forum.
Kind of like tripping off the curb.
Okay.
All the folks around are seeing that.
Yep. Okay. What else you got, folks? You all have these assignments, so you've had it for at least couple of weeks now, so you've got things that hopefully you've got written there as opposed to blank pages. What do you got?
Other people can embarrass you as well. I had that happen just recently. Being with, as in being with someone who does something boneheaded, and you happen to just be in their orbit at that time, and so you get gathered into their nuttiness.
Okay, so being a bystander when someone else has weird going on. Okay.
Bruce, how does that embarrass you because of your association with the individual?
My friend said something to somebody that was entirely and wholly inappropriate. I did not know that. Well, I kind of knew it, but I didn't know that they knew it. And I'm sitting there with them, and the person comes up and proceeds to dress them down. Guilty by association.
Yep. What else is on your list? What else? Yeah, go ahead, Terry.
I got two things. One is whenever someone sees you at what you feel is not your best, i.e. you dressed in something with paint all over yourself, and you go to the post office and see somebody that, is completely opposite of what you're looking like at that moment. And the other thing that kind of does embarrass me too, and it's more internal, is when you don't meet expectations that you think other people have of you. And that expectation could be, as Gene mentioned, you're the guru and you missed it. Or you're the nice guy, but you said something that really, hurt somebody. But whatever that perceived expectation is that someone has from you and you don't meet it, then I get a little embarrassed. It's kind of a generality and not any specific issues but typically it's when I'm not at my best. And that's when I get embarrassed of things, when I fall short of what I think is my best.
Yeah, not measuring up to expectations.
Yeah, but I think, Terry, you also said something that's key here is typically the nature of embarrassment may be when you don't live up to your own expectations. That you believe that you're supposed to present something or present in a way that's different, and then you get caught and you feel as though, oops, that's poor me. And I would throw out there while we're having this discussion, and please understand this correctly. If you are ignorant, perhaps to your own presentation style, or ignorant of the culture, or ignorant of certain information, typically you're not embarrassed. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Because if an illustration comes to mind from an anthropology class I was in, where the professor teaching had been a missionary, and in this particular culture where she was working, everyone, male and female, carried a purse, or what we would call a purse, a bag. But they carried them differently, and the men would carry them over their shoulder like we'd typically see women doing. The women actually carried them with the strap across their forehead and hanging down their back. Not particularly good for, the woman not getting her purse snatched, but that was the culture. And so when she walks out with her purse over her shoulder, she's not embarrassed until she learns that this is part of the culture. Until then, she feels just fine because that's what she's used to in her own American culture. So we do sometimes, out of ignorance, fail to get embarrassed because we don't know that we're doing something that is countercultural.
What else is on your list?
You're going about your day and then you get home and like, oh, there was that booger hanging out of your nose, or
Thank you.
or whatever, fill in the blank. Like,
Yeah.
oh man.
Yeah, like Bruce said, there's spinach in your teeth. Yeah, I hate that.
Yeah, this is the problem sometimes when you talk with church people, because see, if this was an assemblage of your friends and you were out at a party or a birthday event, there would be a whole lot of interjections about stuff that causes you embarrassment. But because you're getting together kind of with church people, sometimes we don't lend the reality to the conversation that we experience. And so when my wife's talking about the mucus hanger-oner that's been a part of your face for the workday, well, yeah, that's reality. And we certainly don't want to consider that that's what we would present in the group of believers. But folks, look, I'm going to mention a couple things in just a second, maybe in a moment, that some of the best embarrassment happens among church people. Let me throw out one for you. Flatulence. When you are in a church building with a typical church event and flatulence occurs and you're the source of the flatulence, I would guarantee you feel not just embarrassed, but mortified. And I'm not even adding to that. My wife already mentioned the old mucus hanger-oner. There's also burping. You've also got drooling. Both of those monsters, you see Bruce there with a little bit of a chuckle, those are major forms of embarrassment for you. Ellen and I have a friend this week who just, a couple days ago, flew to Turkey. And so she's participating in the wedding of her brother there, and her soon-to-be sister-in-law had to apprise her of all of the things she needed to know as not only an American, but also as a woman to be aware of, not to or try to avoid doing in Turkey, because those things, unbeknownst to her, would be insulting to the culture. One of those was, be careful not to show or to point the soles of your feet at another person, because that's considered a major insult. And so where typically Americans cross their legs, or guys especially sit with their legs so that their shoe is kind of parallel to the ground pointing at someone, you got to be careful doing that in certain places in the world, certainly in the Turkish community, because that can be considered an insult. And because you're ignorant of it, you don't feel necessarily the embarrassment, while those around you are feeling embarrassed either for you or embarrassed that you don't know. So what else is on your list? Stuff that causes you embarrassment.
Have we covered the challenges with the mouth yet? Have we really done that?
No, go ahead.
Oh, something like, I'll just give you an example. So when's the baby due? I'm not pregnant. So yeah, whatever. Just insert foot in mouth.
I appreciate that one. Jerry's been with me when I've actually launched that particular one on one or maybe two occasions, because I didn't learn the first time.
Hey, the sad thing is, I may have put the thought in your head because I think I asked you, is she pregnant? And you had to ask.
Wow.
Yeah, I had a little mortification after that. The person said, "Oh, I'm not pregnant." What do you say?
Well, that's when you go to, not from the physical shape, but you just have this glow about you.
Sometimes you can't put that spin on the genie after that genie comes out of the bottle, because the next question is, why would you say that to me? The glow.
Yeah, it's best just to stop talking.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah.
Out of the abundance of words, sin is not lacking. So
Yeah. Better be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt.
So since I have you so deeply in thought, let me read a partial list of things for you that I think Sarah will help me with on the big virtual board. Wardrobe malfunctions.
Yep,
This is the
open.
one that XYZ PDQ. This is the one we used to regularly confront our schoolmates with. Let alone getting to the Janet Jackson level. Big word there, malpropisms. This is kind of just basically you say the wrong thing, perhaps the wrong way. I really enjoy conversating with people. I feel like I'm orientated to doing that. So some of those fun little things. I went to the library yesterday, and there you go. Some of you're coming along with me. There you go. Here's a big one. Answering thank you, Don. Especially now that spell check is out there, we don't really do a good job of editing ourselves, because we don't realize spell check doesn't sometimes take into consideration homonyms, homophones, or contractions. So it makes us look like we're really, really poor communicators in writing these days. Answering incorrectly. This is why a lot of people, even in a setting like this, don't answer questions posed by an instructor, because we feel embarrassed if we answer incorrectly. Our sister and our technological guru here, Sarah, answered this one: tripping, resulting perhaps in a fall. Spilling something. Thank you. For those of you that have gone out to dine, spilling something is pretty mortification. And I've got flatulence there, drooling, burping. I already mentioned those because those automatically go into the personal embarrassment hall of fame. Getting a speeding ticket. Thank you, appreciate it. And here's kind of where that one comes in. If you're savvy and you get past the point where you're already embarrassed that the policeman has stopped you, you also become aware of this. People driving by you are looking in the car where you are. And some of those people, depending on where you've been stopped, know you. So we had a couple here. And thank you, Don. You're right. Teachers do make mistakes. But by the very virtue of what teachers do, learners are less emboldened to be able to challenge information presented by an instructor or by a facilitator. And that's partly why Brother Gene, and certainly my and Bruce's, our whole foundation is trust us, but go and verify. Don't necessarily believe whole hog what we say, because we're speaking from this huge volume. Go and read it, test what we have to say, and then come on back in and bring it. Public speaking, another reason why people don't say things aloud. Praying aloud, and this is always one that I chuckle about. Dancing, especially if you have to be if you happen to be a Caucasian male.
Or Elaine.
I don't think she was embarrassed.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
Right. Everybody, this goes back to Bruce's point. The people around her were embarrassed either for being next to her or for knowing her. Okay, so early morning, 9:30, we've talked a little bit about embarrassment. Let's go to shame. What causes you shame?
What is the difference?
Okay, so let's jump there first. What's the difference between embarrassment and shame? So here, you know what? Because it's a Sunday and I'm feeling good about Sunday, let me throw this out for you as possible definitions, and then we'll jump back to embarrassment and shame. So embarrassment is feeling self-conscious or feeling awkward. And the sense of embarrassment is fleeting and temporary. It's fleeting and temporary. Okay? Shame has a couple of components. Shame is a painful feeling of humiliation or distress, and it's caused by wrong, foolish, or other behavior. And then this may also be more key here too. Shame lingers and makes us feel unworthy and alone, and not alone in a good way. Does that help, Gene?
I think so. And so again, I have to go back to my work. Probably the biggest shames I've ever had have been employment termination. Those
Yes.
linger with me.
Yes.
And that's it's one thing to say, okay, yeah, Gene should have caught that, but it's another thing altogether when they say, okay, pack your box, you're leaving, you're not doing anything else, you're not touching your computer, and you're being escorted out of the building. And
Yes.
I've had that happen. That's a humiliating sort of thing.
Yes.
And it was indeed it was another mistake, but it was of a greater magnitude. I've also, hand over your keys kind of situation. Now that you've given the definition difference, I can see that. And yeah, I've experienced that.
Hey, Gene, and your two examples are really very great polar caps to help us to key into when answering this. When you talked earlier about, oops, Gene made a mistake. Well, one of the things that happens is sometimes people like to watch instructors make mistakes, but it doesn't lessen the fact that you still Lieutenant Dan, right? You still get to be an instructor, even if you make a mistake. When someone asks you for your keys or when someone shows you the door, it's done and it's over. So if there was a chance to rectify or correct your mistake, you no longer have it because people now find you unworthy. And that sense of unworthiness may even follow you into not only the next employment opportunity, but all employment opportunities thereafter.
That's correct.
Isn't there a difference between ashamed and shamed? You're shamed by others, but you're ashamed for yourself.
Well, thank you, Don. I think that both of those are going to be in the same arena, because the shame factor is, it's not when you drool on yourself, or when you have that XYZ PDQ factor, when you zip up your fly, you laugh about yourself. When you hang out with those people the next day, very likely that incident's been forgotten, and you've kind of forgotten it too, because it's basically fixed. And it didn't make you feel unworthy or inadequate. It just made you feel like Jimmy the Stupo for a couple of seconds. You just felt real stupid, and then it was over and you moved past it. Whether you're shamed by others or whether you feel shamed from yourself, it's a lingering attitude that permeates and doesn't go away after a short period of time. In fact, it sometimes colors you maybe for the rest of your life. Let me throw out one for you. For ladies, abortions. It's something I can never get my head around, but I've talked with enough folks who've gone through this that say, when you do this early in your life, it seems to be a decision that you make that you're comfortable with, because the decision affects the immediate consequences of your life. But there's no way sometimes that people can think 20, 30, 40 years down the road, and when they're at those points and they look back, they feel a sense of unworthiness. They feel a sense of humiliation later on for this action that happened decades ago. That is maybe something that they're the only person living that still remembers. So they may feel personal shame about it, because the folks who were in their environment have all passed away years ago, but they still feel some sense of humiliation, even though it happened decades ago.
But ashamed, you can do something about a lot of times. Being shamed, you cannot do anything about.
So I think that, we're going to talk about it. Shame is going to be really tough. There certainly are remedies for shame, but we don't practice them well.
Shame, it's easy to get stuck.
Is that you, Di?
Yes.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
go ahead.
If you feel
Yeah.
shameful about something, you're almost stuck in this self-imposed prison because you feel like what you've done is unforgivable. And, I think of alcoholism. My sister's dealing with that right now because she's seeing the ramifications of, what she chose there. But in a way, it's not even a decision for some people, because they just get, I think of drug addicts. I think of people that are addicted to anything, food, pornography.
Yep.
There's just so many things that cause us to feel like we can't tell someone, or it can't be forgiven. Like you said, abortion, there's a divorce. There's lots of things that cause us to feel shame. Being battered, think about how those people are stuck.
Yep. And Don's right on when he's sort of talking about, the difference of people making you feel shame, and then you feeling shamed, that there's kind of subsets within that. But I believe as we discuss this, you'll discover they're different sides of the exact same coin, but they are far different from being embarrassed, because embarrassed is fleeting. It's gone. It may be a joke that people reference from time to time, but it's almost like with Gene's situation at work. People might joke with Gene that years ago he made a mistake in a presentation, but he's still employed there. So it doesn't ruin his sense of worth. It's not really a sense of humiliation at this point. At this point that he's still there, it's kind of a funny, because there's enough time where he's moved away from it, as opposed to the way he felt in the moment when it was something that where he was put in focus. But like you say, oh, go ahead.
If you go into the everyday life and you go to psychologists, they will try to take a shameful thing and show you that, there's corrections for it, there are ways to get around it. Then you go into spiritual, you go to a preacher and he teaches you what the meaning of repentance is and how if you really are sorry for something, that, it's a mistake. It's not something that lingers and you can get around it. But when you're shamed by a bunch of people for something, I mean, look at the things that are going on politically now. I mean, you got people that are innocent of all kinds of things and they're being shamed, they're being fired, So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Don. And I think as we talk through this, some of the discussion points we'll get to is there's a remedy for embarrassment. There's a remedy for shame. And I think you're on the edge of this, and Diane mentioned this earlier. We regularly would, you guys remember some of, and I'm sorry, my apologies, Nate, my apologies, some of the younger folks with us. When I was younger, I used to listen to my parents talk about a remedy that seemed to be a cure-all for everything. It was called castor oil. Okay, I got some chuckles there. And
well,
it would seem to be a
it's now
remedy.
Windex.
Sure. So if we consider Windex the modern castor oil, which Windex, poor Gus. Okay. Anyway, what my parents and their generation used to say about the castor oil is that it cures a whole bunch of ailments, but no one wants to drink it. No one wants to drink it. And so there are a lot of remedies potentially for certainly shame, but whether we embrace what the remedy is where sometimes the challenge is for us. And that's partly what this lesson together is going to flesh out, is that, it's almost like the discussion that Ellen and I have with our kids, is they want to talk about the cultural abnormalities. They want to talk about all the things that are potentially wrong in the world today. And we say to our kids, well, guess what? You don't have to believe in Jesus. I mean, you should, but you don't have to. But guess what? If you follow his teachings, it will be the remedy for what ails the culture. And at that point in time, there becomes silence in the exchange. Because the remedy, the medicine, is not that which they want to take, even if it works.
Hey, Preston.
Yeah, Dad.
I forgot to mention that sometimes shame is not because of something you did. We had a friend that stayed with us this weekend, and he was abused as a child. And he still battles with that shame. And he didn't even do anything to deserve that. But I think, we have to teach, forgiveness is a remedy for a lot of shame that we feel, but it's hard to claim that forgiveness for ourselves, because we feel like if we forgive somebody who did something bad to us, or because we did something bad, then we're making light of that situation.
Okay, well, you're beginning to portend into even our next study when you start talking about the power of forgiveness and what it really is all about. So we went to a question with that Gene was questioned, and he said, because the second part of the question is, what causes you shame? And Gene says, well, what's the difference between shame and embarrassment? So in part where we are right now is because we're defining shame and embarrassment. So let's go back to shame, and let me put some items up to have you think about, so that you can see some of the conversation pieces that Don was interjecting. Some of Diane's thoughts are a part of this, and these are just the beginning of conversation starters, broad categories. So what causes you shame? And when we mean shame, causing you personally shame: being assaulted, being convicted of a crime, experiencing trauma, feeling exposed. And there's a lot of good discussion even about that feeling exposed in terms of, if we were going to throw that out there differently and more rawly, feeling naked. And if we were really going to follow that to its really ending conclusion, part of Jesus's death handles our feeling naked and exposed. But that's a different kind of discussion. Maybe we'll get to it in our next study. Feeling unappreciated. This certainly goes to Gene's employment discussion. Feeling inadequate. Dishonorably discharged. Abortions on this. Shyness, introversion, feeling vulnerable. There certainly may be other items that are individual, but perhaps these large, broad categories, you can almost put any instance into these big categories, because these are the things that tend to linger with you. Sometimes you can't escape them. And when I say you can't escape them, when you've been convicted of a crime, every time you apply for a job, unless it doesn't have an application, you need to check off the box that says FELON. If you've been dishonorably discharged, not necessarily from a job, but certainly maybe a job in the military, if someone says, have you been fired on an application, you need to answer, if you're answering truthfully, yes. And if you're dishonorably discharged from the military, that lingers with you in such a way that that may actually have a prison charge that's attached to that. So let me back off a couple of moments, give you some moments to weigh in if you want to, in terms of these big categories of things that cause you shame, thinking about the definition of what we've talked about in terms of shame and embarrassment.
Yeah, I want to add a couple things. So I think that potentially some of these big mistakes we talk about having occurred by your children can cause you shame. So, you know, if your children have been convicted of a crime or suspended from school, that can cause you shame. Additionally, something in your past that may not have bothered you in your past, but as you've changed and grown and, you know, became a Jesus believer, that now causes you shame. Because, oh man, I did that, you know, in my past before I knew Jesus, and I'm kind of feeling shameful about it.
You know what, Ellen, I think that I've been sitting here thinking about something that came to mind as Preston was talking about abortion, not nearly as severe as that, but it was one of those things that lingers, and I think that I was trying to figure out where that fit in, and I think you've hit on it. It was something you've done in the past that didn't bother you then, but you've changed, you've grown, you've developed in a way that makes what you've done now different to you. And that whole category I was thinking of was tattoos. I've never had a tattoo, so I don't know, but I'm thinking that the tattoo you get for your forever love that doesn't last forever, for example, or you know, or you have numerous tattoos and one of them's marked off the previous one, kind of thing. I don't know how that works, but you know, maybe you've got a tattoo or something like that, and that, okay, when you did it was, you know, hey, I got a tattoo, I'm proud of that, but 20 years down the line, decades down the line, it's like, you know what, I really shouldn't have done that, and that's a really tough thing to reverse.
Hey, Preston, can I share something cultural?
Please.
This impacts me a lot more than it does you guys, but you might run into it as well. A word I haven't really heard thrown out as far as shame is the idea of worth. Here where I live, we have a large Asian population. And one of the first things they teach you when you come here is to not shame people, to not shame Asian people. And so that literally comes down to when you share the plan of salvation, because we so often in our Western mindset want to make people understand our lostness. But oftentimes the way we do that is by making people recognize the fact that we are not worthy of anything but hell.
Right.
And you almost lose an Asian person when you start that way. If your goal is to diminish their worth, you have already lost the conversation, because you have shamed them, and at that point you lose the conversation. And so it can almost become manipulative in some ways when you share the gospel. If you do that in my culture, instead you have to present from the standpoint of where's the emptiness in your life? What are you missing? Those sorts of things. And so it's a much broader concept in an Asian mindset than it is in a Western mindset. And you start to talk about not only shame for yourself, but what have you done for your family? What have you done for your community? It's a much larger problem in an Asian mindset. I just want to throw that in, since we are looking at spreading the gospel. That does matter.
When I'm thinking about some of the items that Don was talking about earlier, let me give you a bit of an example of shame, and then leading a bit toward the remedy. And this is one that I think most of us that are joined today will be familiar with. Virginia's governor, Ralph Northam, and my wife had mentioned having something occur in your rearview mirror that now you have to face today. But because of who you are today, when you look back, you really do feel a sense of shame about it, because you're a different person. So if you all remember, back during the early parts of Ralph Northam's administration, we had the blackface photo that was presented from his med student days, and in the photo was a Klansman and then a person in blackface. And, you know, it would make sense to put the folks in that photo at about 24, 25, 26 years of age. The culture, and this is why it's always important to teach about the culture and the climate of not only the Bible, but of the framing fathers of the time of Abraham Lincoln, so that you understand the context in which people lived, worked, and breathed. And so at the time, it probably made sense that this was a funny thing to be able to do and to parody. Now, 40 years hence, after the gentleman becomes governor, he at first takes responsibility for the photo, but then perhaps because of counsel that he's getting, then says, it's not me, I'm not there. And so this is kind of, in some regard, a way of that photo, whether he owns it or not, is a source of shame. And part of the remedy would be a couple of the items that we're going to talk about in a moment here, where I would not, I wouldn't have a problem with the fact that this is something that Governor Northam did and it's in his rearview mirror, if especially over the course of the years, he's not practiced behavior or attitudes that said that that's the kind of person that he is. And owning up to that situation would have left a different taste in my mouth toward the gentleman and toward that position as the Virginia governor than it does for me right now. And that's in part because the potential remedy is not that which he wished to embrace. So let me, and I'm not looking to have us in a political discussion right now. We're talking about shame, how it potentially is something that you didn't feel shameful for decades ago, but now because of the person that you are, you can see some potential shame in that, and then not embracing the potential remedy. So why don't we take a look at that? Maybe that'll help further some of our conversation. Our next question talks about what's the remedy for embarrassment and what's the remedy for shame. So let's take a look at this, because these are two very different things. So the remedy for embarrassment, not taking oneself seriously. And folks, if you struggle with this as a remedy for embarrassment, well, guys, let me tell you who owns this particular remedy. Comedians. In the days before we got to this particular cultural climate, our comedians actually owned this remedy and used to help inject it into us when we got bigger than our britches. Not taking ourselves too seriously. And then on the heels of that, laughter. When you can laugh at the fact that XYZ PDQ just happened, or laugh at the fact that, oops, there's that booger hanging out of my face. When you can laugh at it, it then gets easy for the next thing to happen, which is short memory. When things of an embarrassing nature occur, you having a short memory is part of the remedy for you having the confidence to stroll back into that conference room where someone just caught you not doing and having the correct information. Having a short memory. I like the next one best because I think that this one works best in this group if we consider it truly. And that's this, true friendship. And here's what that means. Bruce is going to watch me make a weirdo of myself more often if I trust myself with him, but I also trust that he's not necessarily going to hold it over me, the fact that I just tripped and fell on my face all the time. Now, you're right, exactly. I appreciate Bruce's face because with Bruce, all I will say to you is ask Bruce about Christine's bike riding acumen. Or don't. There are some things that happen between friends that become the fodder of good jokes through the years when you just go, remember the time that I did this, or remember the time that you did this, Jerry. And so true friendship helps to minimize the embarrassment factor, and it later on becomes almost a bonding point because I was there when you did that. Minimal or no recording devices. Now, this is lost on today's generation because for the most part, thank you, Di, when we were engaged in the stuff we were engaged in from high school through perhaps 25, 26, there wasn't a miniature video camera either that your friends felt they needed to wield or that you needed to wield on yourself, showing the world all of your missteps and all of your mistakes. So the less of a recording, the less of let's go to the video, the less of that you have in moments of embarrassment, the easier it is to build a bridge and get over it.
America's funniest videos. You can now make money on them.
Correct. And that was probably the thing that ushered in the selfie even before our portable cameras did that, because we recognized you potentially could win $50,000 and $100,000. So let's film all of the aspects of our life. And some of those, some of those are embarrassing when you're presenting your kids, but when those kids get to be big, sometimes that embarrassment turns to shame depending on the content of what was shown and to how many Americans or worldwide people got to see you biting Jimmy's finger or that sort of thing. And then the last remedy that I have up here is this, is the ability to move forward. Diane mentioned this before briefly. Sometimes both embarrassment and shame both paralyze people and they can't get out of their own way, because they always go back to this key or this pivotal event that they think was the marker moment in their lives, and they won't accept the remedy to move forward. So let me take a moment there to be quiet and have you guys bring in if you need to.
Just one thought on that. I knew somebody a long time ago that was a terrible snow skier. And they were just like a highlight reel of embarrassment watching them on the skis. And I'm terrible too. So, I mean, I'm laughing at them as I'm laying on the ground. But, you know, it got to the point they wouldn't go anymore because they were like, and I thought, how silly is that? Nobody cares that you're falling down 19 times. So to your point, yeah, you got to let it go.
So the remedy for shame takes on perhaps a different look. And let's take a look at some of these remedies. Recognition. You got to be aware of what this thing is. That is a pivotal issue for you that lingers. You got to be aware of that. And folks, and I like that Bruce presented this to us as Westerners. This is for believers. If I'm just putting on my believer hat for a moment, this is that thing that you can go to that helps you to recognize why the need for Jesus. In the regular world, where people don't necessarily think about their responsibility to their creator, this is where you at least need to recognize that you carry this thing with you almost every place you go, almost with all the people that you hang out with. You need to recognize it as opposed to pretending that it doesn't exist. Another component of the remedy, addressing it directly. A lot of times we like to address symptoms of stuff as opposed to head on what the issue really is. Understand the source. So some of this source of shame may come from me, or it may come from the fact that Bruce was there when this happened, or I let Bruce down so pivotally, or I let my parents down in such a way, and now my parents are deceased, that I can't, or I feel like I can't make it up to them. So I need to understand the source. Some of the remedies are consider the evidence, consider the truth. And this may lend itself to kind of forgiveness, okay? Consider the evidence and consider the truth. What's happened for you, or what this source of shame is, may not be something that's trivial. It may not be something that's mundane, but you need to consider it for what it is as strongly as you can. Consider it, and then say, how much impact potentially should it have in my life versus how much am I allowing it to have in my life? And that's one of the things that perhaps helps you from being paralyzed, that helps you to keep advancing forward once you sort of consider the evidence and the truths. So let me give you a couple more here. A couple more remedies for shame. Explore alternatives, explore alternate behavior. Folks, I cannot tell you how many times I've encouraged or I've seen people in the midst of things that they consider shameful. And I suggest part of the reason that you feel paralyzed or you feel like you're going around in circles is because you continue to do the same things and expect different results. You've got to change the pattern of behavior. You've got to change the way you think about something. You've got to change your perspective, your attitude, your approach, because other than that, doing things the same way is going to create the same outcomes. So you have to consider alternate behavior, alternate situations. And then the last remedy that I think is a good one that would really work well amongst believers is this. Discover others with similar experiences. So this is kind of when we fall short with each other, when we ask believers or Christian people about Jesus and they give us a resume that goes back 50 years, as opposed to maybe telling us right now and today what it is you're struggling with. Because the nature of doing that may help me to build a different kind of relationship with Gene when Gene goes, I never thought anybody else felt that way. I never thought anybody else experienced that before. And now what happens is we begin to develop relationships that make us more like a family than more like a bunch of folks who get together on a given day to practice some traditions that perhaps really don't permeate our lives. So let me back off there. After you've heard those remedies, we've talked about what embarrassment, what shame is, what's the difference between the two. You can weigh in there.
Some of these remedies seem to be interrelated. To understand the source can help you to explore alternate behavior. One of the things that I've referenced my less than stellar employment record a couple of different times, and some of them, you look at the source. I was fired from 2, not 1, but 2 food service jobs. Okay. And both of them were the result of lack of speed. I was not fast enough to make, I could either, and I've gotten in trouble saying this, so I'm going to say it quickly and move on. I could either make a pizza fast or I could make it correctly, not both. And so they said, no, I don't think we're going to work. This is going to work. or I could not keep up washing dishes at the restaurant. So once I looked at that, I'm going, okay, I realized that I don't have the acumen to be in food service. Therefore, I'm going to alter my behavior and not apply for any more jobs like that. So I haven't. And I've even told people who wait on us, I can't do what you do. I know I can't do what you do. So thank you. You know, so seems like there's an interrelationship between understanding the source and using that to alter your behavior so that that sort of shame doesn't occur again.
It's easy to say, try alternatives. It's easy to suggest alternative thinking. Surprisingly, there are many people who say, I'm okay with change. One of the things that my wife and I have learned and continue to learn is that's a bunch of not truth stuff. Many, many people are afraid of change, let alone embracing change and doing things differently. They don't like it. And so being stuck and mired in your own mess is unfortunately one of the characteristics of a lot of the human beings that I've encountered in my life who struggle to get out of their own way. And then as we take a look at this lesson and the scriptural foundation for it, hopefully you'll begin to see where the struggle comes between I say I believe in Jesus, then what does my life look like if I belong with Jesus?
One other thing that comes to mind when it comes to this whole shame thing, and again, my employment record, the last time I was terminated, not of my own desire, as I looked back on the track record of the new company that bought my old one, considering the evidence and the truths, I began to realize that they had it in for me in the first place. They were targeting all of the former company's employees and trying to start a new slate. And I was the last one. And they trumped up something in the interest of getting rid of me. And as a matter of fact, I've got a friend that's experiencing the same sort of thing, where they're trumping up stuff against him. He's been with the company like 11, 12 years. And so they're trumping up this stuff probably in order to get someone in less expensive, less salaried, less tenured, and obviously less experienced. So sometimes the evidence indicates that it really wasn't my fault. While I didn't feel all that great about it, it wasn't, something that I really, while I made a mistake, it was not something that necessarily I could have avoided. One way or another, they were going to get rid of me anyway. So that's kind of, you get past it, but when you realize, well, if they hadn't gotten it that way, they would have done it some other way. So you move on. And during that whole thing, though, it was like, I could actually fight this. I could actually have, gone to battle for this job. But do I really want to work for these underhanded people, these cutthroat people, and continue to subject myself to that? So it all worked out for the best, but there was a shame associated with it at that time. I think your remedies are very well thought out. Thank you very much, sir.
As I was listening to Gene talk about that, kind of got me thinking about something we see a lot today, and that's on social media, where there seem like there's people out there that all they want to do is shame you into changing your mind, or shame you into being quiet, You see that a lot. And I'm not going to get into the particulars because I probably will offend somebody. But I just see people that they seem like their task is, I'm going to post something that somewhat reflects you, but I'm going to make it so ridiculous that you stay off social media, that something happens to affect your behavior. They're bad actors. And that's where Gene was kind of going with that whole idea. They're bad actors. Their motivations are not good to start with. And so I see that a lot. And maybe that kind of relates back to this whole passage from Romans after it's all said or done, that there are just people out there that are trying to marginalize you. And you have to recognize the fact that they've got an agenda, and that's where they are.
That's so powerful what you just said, Bruce. And I'm gonna circle back here in a minute, but just about 2 weeks ago, I had opened up one of my morning devotions, right? Like I get up just to write a devotion so that God speaks to me about that. Hopefully it encourages other people. I'm not making any points. I'm not trying to give a thesis of the whole gospel. I'm just giving a thought. And I opened last week with a quote that said, "What would you do with your life if you knew that you wouldn't fail?" Basically, what I'm saying is, okay, what is it in you that you haven't done that you know you should? That was kind of where I was going, right? And so it was like a bunch of people, that was great. I mean, pray about that. Anyway, just the typical stuff. Someone I hadn't talked to in 12 years who hadn't liked any of my devotions or quotes or family pictures or babies I had posted, nothing, put on there, did exactly what Bruce said. What would I do? I would do nothing, because you can't learn without failure. ... Almost like, let's continue this conversation. And I'm like, I'd rather jump off the second story of this house than to continue that dumb conversation. Because here's someone that you haven't talked to in years that's just trying to make a point, So obviously I didn't respond, I just deleted it. But Bruce, that is so true. And which takes me to one of the thoughts I heard one of you say a minute ago. Preston, you were talking about this. When you're talking about the causes of shame, sometimes, and Gene, you alluded to this, sometimes my shame comes because I think I have a grasp on what other people's opinions may or may not be of me. And I value that so deeply that if I don't meet up to what I think their opinion is, then I have shame. And the truth is, most people, they don't even, like, they haven't thought twice about what you're thinking about. So it's almost this self-building of this false narrative that we have to continue living out. And people are like, I haven't thought about you in 20 years, And so, but then when you get to these remedies, like, these are so practically powerful. And I thought about, Preston, and I don't want to, I don't want to gospelize it or be Christianese, but I am going to say this, Gene, and you made me think about this. When I think about remedies for shame, I think about the fact that God never wastes pain, and he never wastes moments, and he never wastes anything, and he always uses it for his good. Romans 8:28. We're really good at defining what that good is, and all things work together for good. And we're like, and God, here's what that good needs to look like: A, B, C. And but God's so good at kind of bringing all this together. I mean, the beauty of the sacrifice of Christ came because of the fall of the garden. I mean, we're not going to choose that pathway, but that shame and that fall. I mean, when I think of grace, it drives me to the cross. It drives me to his death. It drives me to the barbaric murder of Christ. Something to be shameful of. It's something to be thankful for. But sometimes I think shame is a part of the process for sure, because we know what the goal is and then we miss it. But I saw Diane's comment on here a minute ago. She's so right. Sometimes we get stuck in the shame part of it. We never get out of that. We never get out to what's the purpose and what is God teaching me, and like your remedies here. What am I learning from this? We never get to that because we get stuck in the shame part, and sometimes we can never get out of it. So I think looking to the future to say, what is God trying to teach me, and how is he going to make this good, and how many other people will grow and change because I chose to walk through my shame and to win again and to see what God does with his grace.
Okay, so I appreciate that you say you're not going to Christianize that. You're not going to churchify it. Okay, so I'll get on board with that because later in the passage, that as the scripture substance for what we're studying, Paul comes out and says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel." So part of the reason we're studying this is the question should be for those of us who haven't over memorized this due to vacation Bible school or some junk like that, excuse me, or some program like that, is to ask this: why does Paul say that? Why does Paul say that I am not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ? Why does he say that? Because Paul seems to be a more learned guy, certainly, than me. And I say that because if Paul brings this up 2,000 years ago, when the gospel of Jesus was almost brand new, after 2,000 years, shouldn't I encounter the same kind of challenge where shame / maybe on a lesser level, embarrassment is something that potentially I'm going to encounter? Because Paul says it. Now, I'm going to also tell you that the remedy in some regard for Paul's mentioning I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus is because he has certainly been confronted by directly the evidence and the truth. And his remedy is this. Watch this, and we won't over-Christian this because we'll come back to it. His remedy is this: I'm a servant and a slave of Jesus. His remedy for his shame is I'm a servant and a slave of Jesus sent to be an apostle. So we're going to get to this, folks, but that's because he has had an encounter with the evidence and the truths, and that has reshaped his life to the point where he is going to address the potentiality of the shame / minorly the embarrassment, and his remedy is I'm a slave. And that is not a good term culturally for us Westerners to address. And I'm a guy with a tan that shouldn't perhaps be saying this today. But we're going to discuss the benefits and the positives of being a slave and what it really means and what it looks like. That's where this study is going to take us. So let me pause there, give you a chance to cancel me if you need to.
I have to get, and I'm not going to cancel you. I'm gonna push that down the street some more because that's so powerful. In essence, Preston, what he's saying is this is not about me. It's not about me. It's not. I don't have my right. I don't have rights. I don't get to, like, I'm not making the final call on this because I've completely yielded my will to this. You can yell at me. You can cancel me. You can make comments about me. You can make fun of me. And if I'm overly responsive to that, that tells me it is about me. You know, it's and Paul's like, it ain't about me. I'm not ashamed because it's about him. He bore the shame. I mean, I think we've walked through that already. So this is not about me. That's a powerful thought that you just shared.
So be aware that we're not going to step on toes for the duration of the sermon because that lasts 20 minutes. We're going to look to step on our toes for the duration of the weeks we do this study. Because at the end of this study, the idea is for you to look at your life and to determine, are you a slave to Jesus? And what that looks like, or what it should look like. And we need to kick around what those obligations mean in this study session, because if our lives don't in some ways reflect Paul's or reflect our version of what Paul's life could look like in today's culture, I'm going to strongly suggest that we're missing the bus. That we then say that we belong to Jesus, but we have no doggone idea what that means, what it looks like, and what our lives should be about every single day. So the next question before I make some people angry is, what people cause you embarrassment or shame? What people?
Young children when they throw tantrums in the store.
All right. Are you the parent or are you the observer?
Either, really, right? Because, if you're the parent and they're throwing a temper tantrum, you're embarrassed because, oh my goodness, this is my child and I just would like to throttle them right now, but you can't. And then when you're the observer, you're kind of embarrassed for the other parent sometimes. Well, you may not be, but
Nope.
okay, maybe that's the mom thing. I don't know. But you're kind of embarrassed for them because you feel bad because 9 times out of 10 you've been there with it.
Yeah, you've been there. You're like, how's it feel, big boy?
That's where I'm living. And, maybe you're right, Sarah, that it's a mom thing because I think most dads are kind of going.
Most dads are like, sucks, doesn't it?
And that's why God made us different.
It's not just kids in our family or anything like that either, but grown adult family members.
Okay.
I think about there were some divisions within our family. I won't say which side, but when they came to town, we called them the Clantons. You never knew what they were going to say, but you knew they were going to embarrass you.
Nothing like having a cement pond in your family.
Sometimes, and I probably goes with Gene, and maybe Gene's seen this too, but people that you work with on projects, because sometimes you don't get to pick your project team. Sometimes your project team is assigned to you based on what people should be able to do, say they can be able to do, whatever. And so sometimes you view those other folks that you are working with as the quote unquote expert. And so you take what they say at face value, and it may not necessarily be the right thing. And sometimes they can say something that you're going, really? You just said that? So sometimes people that you work with can cause you embarrassment and or shame.
Yeah, I'm actually on the other side of that, Sarah, because I'm the one that they're going, he said that. So that's really, I'm actually other guy. Most of my coworkers are spot on. I'm the fairly new guy, number one, and number two, I'm the one that's still trying to catch up with the media lingo, being a member of the media now. So,
Preston, what Bruce shared about how you approach the Asian culture in Hawaii was such an interesting thought to me. So when I hear what causes embarrassment or shame for me because of my occupation, it's the church sometimes and pastors and how they treat people, how they that approach of and listen. I want to say this too. Nobody believes more in repentance than me. It's why I've dedicated my whole life to this. Nobody believes more than right living than me. It's why I've dedicated my whole life. No one believes more than hell than me. It's why I've dedicated my whole life to this. But man, there are better ways to reap a harvest than to offend 1,000 people to get to the one. And I'm not talking about the gospel offending because it does it's on its own. I'm talking about just because we don't want to mature in our approach, or we don't want to listen to what Bruce says, and we hear him say, you can't really start, with the Asian culture, you can't start, and people are like, well, you know what, gospel offends, I'll do what I want. I'm like, I can't. That's embarrassing to me. And it hurts the cause of Christ. And I have to almost start with somebody when they ask them what I do for a living. If we developed any type of pre-conversation for 10 or 20 minutes, almost apologetically say, well, I'm a pastor and, we're working on stuff, so, and not that I apologize for who I am or for the gospel, but, sometimes the church can be its worst nemesis.
I'm going to say something here. And I really cannot say too much in the way in this in a coded fashion, because you guys know me, you know who I'm talking about. So basically, I'm going to just say it out loud. Folks representing my alma mater that's an embarrassment to me. You know, and they, when they end up in the news and doing dumb stuff, it's like, wow. And so now I can't put on my sweatshirt that says I went there, because folks are going to be, instead of seeing my sweatshirt and the great heritage that's behind that, they're going to see the news article that recently came out about that. And that's, to me, that's an embarrassment.
And I love what you just said about that, Gene. I want to flip that too. Because I think one of the neatest moments for me is to sit with somebody who has a negative view of a church, so that I can take a moment to begin to heal that, to say, you know what, I get it. And Gene, what you're talking about is such a powerful thought. It gives me a chance to say, you know, we're not perfect. You know, we mess up. And one of the remedies, if I can jump back, Preston, for just like 10 seconds, one of the remedies for me is to be able to realize I can't spend a whole lot of time on other people's stuff, because I got my own stuff. And I think that comes across very real to someone who is looking at your alma mater, Gene, going, what's wrong with them? And I think, because it is like, you know, and I think could be a divine moment there too, to say, you know what, I wish I could figure all that out, but I can't. I'm trying to figure out my life. But, you know, what about you? So, yeah, that was a good one.
Let's be honest.
Oh, go ahead, Dave.
There's a lot of people out there that they're just looking for an opportunity to bring you down. You know, it could be a power thing, or they're just so unhappy in their own life. You know, they're just out spreading that joy.
We have a lot of drama queens.
Say again.
We have a lot of drama queens in this world.
Yeah. And I would probably say a lot of them inhabit, if not occupy, our churches.
And one of the things we mentioned before was, and you reworded it for me, and your wording was, people think God is Santa Claus. You know, they're there to get what they can, because they don't want to use the talents God gave them. So, you know, they want to pray everything away.
Yeah, and I think that's a terrific reminder, Don, because this whole lesson is, if we think of God, Yahweh God, as a spiritual Saint Nick, this is the lesson to participate in, because when we finish it, it's going to completely reverse any of those expectations. Hopefully what it will do is, when you watch a TV evangelist telling someone that they have not because they ask not, you're going to either throw a shoe at the TV, or you're going to call up the evangelist and you're going to say, excuse me, I'd like to speak with the evangelist, because what he just said makes absolutely no biblical or scriptural sense. That's the idea. Okay, don't go breaking TVs. But if you do want to call up, do that on your own time. Don't mention my name.
My dad was a deacon. His favorite expression was, faith can move mountains, but God expects you to bring a shovel. So God gave you talents to solve problems, and he gave you the ability to do things. And so you don't go to him as a Santa Claus and ask him for every little thing.
And I think that your dad's found wisdom there is a smart one. Sometimes what happens is the neat sayings don't translate into, well, what does that really look like? And during our study, we're going to take a look at, if faith moves mountains, but God expects you to bring a shovel, what does he expect you to do with the shovel? That's what we're going to start taking a look at as we go through this, because let's take a look at this question that we just asked, and then you'll see this next question taking us exactly where Don's dad was talking, that faith moves mountains, but the Lord wants you to bring a bulldozer. Okay? So the people that can cause you embarrassment or shame, we just took a look at your kids, certainly not my kids, your kids, church people, the churches, your family. That's a big source of your embarrassment right there, folks. People who know you or who have expectations about you, and you think that, you know, even subconsciously you failed them. That's why you hate sometimes to go to the family gatherings. Your friends, your significant others, your supervisors, your teachers, authority figures, clergy. And I like this one when we talk about children. When I think about children, and I think, who has an extra special gifting for causing shame/embarrassment, sometimes that's lifelong? Adolescents. Adolescents bring a cruelty kind of to the ball game that sometimes affects people becoming adults for the rest of their lives. If they were bullied, if they had a nickname of sorts, sometimes people can't get out of the way of the paralysis that occurred when they were adolescents, and they get mired in that. And so all of these, I would almost say any group of people, anything you can attach people to can cause you potentially embarrassment, which is fleeting, and shame, which potentially is lifelong. So Don's talking about his deacon dad saying, faith moves mountains, but the Lord expects you to bring a pitchfork, expects you to bring a shovel. So here's my next two questions to you. What's your definition of a volunteer? What's your definition of a servant? Oh, I see you, Gene, so thank you. Appreciate that look over there. What's your definition of a volunteer?
Someone who does something for really no monetary gain, sometimes not even any kind of recognition. They do it because they just want to do it.
You guys agree with Sarah?
We had a saying in the Boy Scout world: if you're a volunteer, no, excuse me, if you're an employee, you work and you get paid. If you're a volunteer, you work and you don't get paid. If you work and you pay to work, you're a scouter.
Okay.
So that's maybe a different level of volunteerism, where you're actually not only not getting paid, you're actually paying for the privilege of being able to do the work. So there may be a couple of different levels of volunteerism there.
I think there's a kind of an undercurrent with volunteer. I think about Habitat for Humanity. If you go down and work on a project, there's going to be 2 or 3 people there that are skilled, supervisors, contractors, that kind of thing. And for the most part, the volunteers are going to be guys like me who may have some skills, but there's not an anticipation that I know what I'm doing. And so the professionals are going to guide me around, and my skill set is not going to be called into question. And so there's that idea, I think, with volunteer, that you're an amateur and you can't exceed or succeed past a certain level. That's what a volunteer is all about.
Like a volunteer is the only genuine servant there is.
We're going to challenge that as we go, Don.
I mean, you can be a servant to a plantation owner, but you can be a servant to God because you voluntarily want to be a servant to God.
So we're going to explore the difference there, because one of the challenges is, especially amongst people that profess a belief in Jesus, we really misunderstand the concept of volunteering. So let's build a little bit on, I like, Sarah said something that immediately kind of got me thinking, and she said, sometimes you volunteer and you don't get anything out of it. I'm going to throw out to you all, you get to disagree, don't buy it just because I'm saying that when you volunteer in today's world, you volunteer because you actually think you're going to get something out of it.
You usually volunteer because you think you have a skill that will bring value, but you're also hoping to get a sense of accomplishment out of it.
Yes. Yes.
And a lot of people do it for the accolades of it.
Yes.
Or to put it on a piece of paper that you volunteer somewhere.
Yes.
I mean, there's so many reasons to volunteer. I think about in the neighborhood that I grew up in, there were volunteer firefighters. They weren't getting paid, but they definitely needed to show up when there was a fire. That was a huge commitment, but I don't think we get that anymore, that commitment that if you sign up to do something, you're going to be there and you're going to do it. Now it almost seems like I'll do it if I have the time, but if it's not convenient, then maybe not tomorrow.
I think go ahead,
Go ahead, Matt.
whoever.
Oh, I was just going to make a comment that, especially now with kids in middle school and high school,
Yep.
they're being, right, so they are doing things, and I'm just going to say doing things in general,
Yep.
because they've got to put it on a college application in order to make themselves look better than somebody else. So
Correct.
it's almost like you've got to have it's a different mindset when you're a volunteer versus an employee. It's a different kind of a mindset, but a lot of times students, teenagers, adolescents, people that are getting ready to go to college, they feel like they have to do all this stuff so they can pad their resume for college acceptance, but they're not doing it for the right reasons.
I think to me, in my opinion, the link between volunteerism and servanthood is Diane and Sarah both just talked about. And it started when Bruce made the comment about, you kind of show up, don't kind of depend on me to make this thing work. I'm just kind of here to, like, if you need me to run, get something, because if I'm in charge of putting that, picnic table together or building that porch or that handicap ramp, it's going to be worse off when I leave than before it began. So true volunteerism. So there you got Bruce saying, I'm just kind of here to, work around the edges because I don't know what I'm doing, because you got 2 or 3 people there who know what they're doing. Then you got Diane saying, when you go to volunteer, you're expecting some type of return. And that's so true. Both of those are true. So I think the essence of volunteerism, when it bleeds over into servanthood, is me showing up, not having to be in charge. I kind of don't know what I'm doing. This is volunteerism. So tell me what to do, whether that's grab the nails or go get drinks for everybody or sweep up the mess I just made because I sawed the board in half. If you're there for accolades, that's not help. That's not making you feel the warm and fuzzies. But I think that begins to bleed over into servanthood, where it says, I'm just here to move the whole thing forward, whether I'm at the front or not. In my premarital counseling, I don't remember much about it. It was 3 weeks. It started at 8 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. It ran for 4 hours. It was terrible. But the only thing I remember him saying to me was this. He said this to my wife. He said, Erica, you don't have to be at the front of the parade to lead it. And what he was saying was, everyone has an important role in this. And so I think that there's a point at which, because what Diane said is so true. When volunteering has turned into, how do I feel afterwards, and what accolade am I getting, and can I put this on my application to get into college that I put 8 hours down at the local, whatever. It becomes very intentional, not for the reason that would be at the core of volunteering. So I think to servanthood in there in a minute, like you ain't ready to do, Preston, it kind of qualifies what that means a little bit. And Bruce hit on it when he's like, I'm just kind of here because I love what you're doing. I don't know how to do it, but I'm for all this. Maybe the next project we do, I'll kind of know what to do. But this one, I'm just volunteering. I'm here. I just hope it goes forward. I don't need the credit. I just want it to go forward.
At what point does filling out that application ruin your future? I mean, sometimes you have to do what it takes to get where you want to go.
So one of the neat discussion points that has happened for me listening to you all respond to this question is, we're going to get to servant, but we can't. And we're gonna start up on this next week. I'm gonna give you a little bit of a little picture before we close out this week. But I just realized listening to you all that we're gonna get to servant, but we've got to probably do volunteer better. But we also have to have a tweener. And here's the tweener. We need to talk about being an employee. So we need to go volunteer, employee, servant, because it's fun to do. Almost like grace, mercy, and justice. We need to take a look at how they're interrelated, but how they're all very different. And so, we've captured a lot of elements of the volunteer. We haven't gotten to servant yet, and I appreciate some of a lot of the nuances that you're talking about. I would strongly suggest to you that in today's world, that volunteering has an element of what am I getting out of it, all the time. And I appreciate too that Bruce says, if I'm going to go and help with Habitat for Humanity, I have no idea. I may even have a bucket that has a hole in it that you want me to bring you with the nails in it, because I don't have any clue. But I will tell you that there are situations where there are volunteers who are experts, and because situations have morphed so differently in today's culture, you don't recognize them. Let me give you a couple, okay? In the old days, and not so much today, when you had a company and you had a board of directors, the board of directors was a volunteer group. The board of directors got together to hold you accountable as the company, because there would be older, wiser voices that you would go to that would help you understand how, as the CEO and president of your company, to operate. Today, it's gotten to be a prestige thing because it's a volunteer situation, but it also has a stipend attached to it. So it's a big resume point when you're on the board of Toyota, when you're on the board of Amazon. So where it started out with the idealism of volunteering, now you want to be on all those boards. That's part of the reason you even become a part of the politic machine, because once you're in politics, then you get asked afterwards to be on the boards of stuff. Okay.
AKA Congress.
Yes, and that was my other point, Don. I was going to make this to you as well. That although the dictates of being in a representative republic has us under the practicing democracy, your senators and your representatives were working as volunteers at one point in time. And I would say this is how volunteering has morphed a little bit, because even with potentially the benefit that would work for them individually, their outcome was, how is it going to benefit the whole? And so our culture today has maybe changed our volunteering to not necessarily think about the whole, but to think, what am I personally getting out of this? Am I getting resume points? Am I getting intern points? Am I getting a stipend? Am I getting an attaboy out of this? So sometimes you can be a volunteer and be an expert, because your job right now is not necessarily to do the doing, but it's to shape the doing.
Preston,
Yes,
to follow up with that, what I heard you say in the midst of all of that kind of triggered this for me. I think there's even layers within how we consider volunteerism from this perspective. Is there a vetting process that goes on? I know where I live, in this county I live in, I can volunteer to be on a number of different county boards and county groups that have some pretty high level responsibility, like the Wildlife Council, right? Where you deal with animal, dealing with like invasive species and things like that. I mean, it's got some heft to it at a county level, right? But so my thought was, as you went through that, how do we look at volunteerism? Are we asking for volunteers that actually have a skill set, and we recognize that? Or is it just any old warm body will do? And that's where we sometimes misplace the whole thought process too. Well, they just need somebody. Oh, if nobody else will do it, I'll do it, kind of thing.
Right. And Bruce, I would say that perspective is one that has found its way into the Western, if not the American, the United States church over the past maybe 100 years. Let me close with giving you this scenario that occurred for me that I witnessed 2 weeks ago, to be able to help you understand why we need to distinguish and talk about the difference between volunteerism, being an employee, and being a servant. And then I'll invite your commentary, and then we'll pray and get ready for the next stuff. By the way, thank you, Don, for joining us. Terry, good to see you out there. Rodney and Susan, look at you guys way up north joining us. Great to have you with us this morning. And as usual, Bruce, it's good to have you too. I was in a in a church building where there was a team of folks, and the team of folks were known as the technical team. So they were in charge of projecting the words on the big screen, kind of like what Sarah's doing there on the little virtual screen. They were in charge of the amplification, the audio visual in the back. They were in charge of piping any music that needed to be piped through. And they were also in charge of making sure that the vocals and the instruments worked well enough. And there was a situation where one of the mics seemed to fall off channel. It wasn't working quite well. And one of the technicians at the board didn't know quite what to do. And one of the other technicians that was there was trying to tell the person, why don't you try this? Why don't you try this? I think this might work. And the one technician who was first, or who's primarily at the board, looked to the other one and he said, let's go get, and I'm making up the name, let's go get Paul to do this because he's paid and we're not. So when Bruce asks the question, are we populating our situations that involve volunteers? Are we populating those with people who are warm, perhaps able bodies, or are we asking for experts to come in and to serve as volunteers? And guys, my last comment as I back off and give you some room there is this. I would challenge, you wouldn't want me coming to, no, I've already talked about my own skill set. You already know that. You wouldn't want a really nice guy coming to help put the fire out at your house if he didn't have the capability of being a quality volunteer fire person. Because in the seconds or minutes that it takes the guy to tell me where and how to adjust the nozzle and how to hold the hose without being thrown 50 feet into the air, and where to point the hose, if to point the hose, all of that could be valuable time that's been wasted instead of saving your house that the person is needing to give me direction. So I'm done there. Let me be quiet, have your feedback, and then we'll pray together and move on. Your thoughts?
I've got to echo back on what Bruce said and what you just kind of finished with, because there's so much truth to the fact that the church has become just a melting pot of mediocrity in regards to really putting people on point with their gift. You know, and here's the thing: the Bible spends so much time on our gifts and how God gifted us. He gave us purpose. He created us uniquely. We were fearfully and wonderfully made. Before you were formed in the womb, I knew you, and I knit you together in the womb. If we really believe that, we wouldn't have been throwing people to the slaughter when it comes to the serving in the church. But we've got into this, and I hate to say this, and I'm allowed to say this because I live here. Okay. I got 5 kids, and we've homeschooled most of our kids throughout the court. They get to choose every year, but they usually choose that because they can be done with their work and early, and yeah, whatever. My point is this: with that homeschool culture is, it tends to run with the idea when it comes to athletics and competition that there really is no thriving to win. It's just an experience that everyone needs to have, and it needs to be a good experience. And we have not, obviously my family's not that way because I'm a Dolphin fan and we always win. So I'm used to that. But I think in the church, Bruce, in the church culture, we've gotten to the point where, if Betty wants to sing, then before God, Betty needs to sing. And I've always been of the opinion, Betty can't sing. Betty's never been able to sing. And I love Betty. Doesn't mean, well, you know what? Are you saying that God can't use Betty? No, I'm not saying God can't use Betty. I'm just saying he would use her better in the nursery. Because let me drive that home. And this is a whole series, Preston. Here's why. I'm not presenting Betty. I'm not representing Betty. I'm not representing Matt. I'm not representing the church. I'm representing Jesus Christ. And we have to do that with excellence because it deserves that. And if I got you mismatched with your gift, I'm not representing Christ well. I look like a big goof. And then if you pawn it off on, well, I'm just trying to be nice. Well, you know what? And you trying to be nice, you've just crossed hairs with another biblical principle, which is number 1, do things with excellence. Number 2, honor Jesus Christ well.
we had an experience. I say we, it was Michaela and I. Kathy stayed home with her mother. Tuesday night, we went out to the National Night Out at the Speaking Spirit location that used to be ours. And we were greeted, I guess, and in some ways ushered about by a young lady named Sam. Very, very sweet lady. And I commented to her that a couple of things. Number one, I commented to her that she seemed like she had the gift of hospitality. She was the right person to be doing what she was doing. And number two, I also noticed that what they've done with our old building was with excellence. It is just gorgeous. I mean, they have converted a building that was sad looking into something that really looks a lot like a convention center. I mean, it's really, really super. So an example of using your gifts and also doing things with excellence all in one night. And they were using their giftedness in a special way. Now, I have to say I sort of disagreed with her use of the term. I think she just misused the term. She was talking about the pastor and indicated his use of his gift of apostleship. And I'm going, no, that's a gift of administration you're talking about, not apostleship. But anyway, because apostleship has miracles associated with it, from what I understand from Scripture, or whatever. So, but yeah, using the gifts, the giftedness, working behind the scenes is my wife's gift. She would rather not be heard from, does not want to do public speaking. That's a giftedness. We need to look for people and put them, as Matt said, in their giftedness. And this and one of the things he mentioned with Betty was one of Preston's hot buttons. People need to be singing with excellence. That need to be singing, and the ones that don't need to be singing need to be doing something else that's in keeping with their giftedness. And that's all I'm going to say.
Hey, Gene, I'm glad you brought up Speaking Spirit, because I wanted to kind of piggyback on that. You know, we did a lot of the same setup as they had. I mean, they definitely had more inflatables and all that other stuff, and they had wonderful greeters. But like every volunteer, there needs to be intentionality, and they invited all their Speaking Spirit groups, Chesterfield, the other Henrico location, to be there. And a lot of them came. They were probably the majority of the people there, but most of them were acting like a guest, which, you know, I was standing behind a couple of ladies, and one did turn to say, oh, you know, make sure you get something to eat, but she didn't like invite me to join them. She clearly knew I was a guest, because I was, you know, she'd never seen me, I don't think. And I was probably one of the few of white color that was there. So, you know, I think we need to be more intentional to make people feel welcome. Everybody was open. They wanted to feel, they wanted us there, but it's just that little reach out and ask somebody to join you thing that I think was missing. But overall, it was a very nice night. I don't think they had a whole lot of people from the neighborhood that came, but they definitely had a huge presence there of their own ministry.
So, folks, if I can, even in the spirit of our discussion right now of volunteerism, of understanding ultimately what being an employee means, and then moving to servant to being a slave. I don't know if you, while we do this, if you take a look at the commentary, folks, there's some vibrant inter exchange, vibrant discussion that's happened today. And what I would hope that doesn't happen is, although we meet at this time the way that we do, and have kind of apportioned the time the way that we do, where we kind of study together first, and then we sing, and then we have a part where Steve helps us understand the culture in today's apologetics, and then we gather for what the Lord's laid on Matt or Gene or Bruce's heart, and then we kind of close out. Don't necessarily get used to things happening the same way all the time. Allow for the free, and that's why we go over instead of ending at 11 o'clock. We end the conversation in the morning when it needs to end. Just like Matt or Gene or Bruce have the opportunity that the afternoon ends when it ends. Because when people get used to situations being the way that they are, then that's all they expect. And when you have sort of Bring a Friend to Church Day, when you have National Night Out, when you have VBS, sometimes it's very difficult when you have contrived opportunities to do things that are more organic. And folks, these conversations that we have, when you take a look at some of the wonderful things that Don has thrown out, when you take a look at some of the comments that Terry has presented early on, when you listen to some of the fun that Gene and Bruce interject into the conversation, folks, these are conversation points to do what it is that Diane talked about that churches don't do well. Have intentional discussions with people, with real life talk that can get you talking about Jesus. And that's why you see things phrased in our discussions the way that they are, folks, with a lot less churchification attached to it. This is a discussion, these are discussions that you can have with people who don't know the Bible because they know these words, and these words, in a lot of ways, the way that Bruce talked about, are not so offensive until you attach Jesus to them. But you can have these discussions because some of these are about celebrating recovery. Some of these are about self-help stuff. You can have the discussion with people, talking about culture, talking about slavery mindset, talking about ultimately where we get to excellence, talking about shame and embarrassment, because everyday people understand this stuff. So when I usually pray with and for us, don't let this be a checklist time, there's organic opportunities to use some of the elements of our discussions to engage people in meaningful interactions during the course of your week. And ultimately, when we get good at what we do, folks, we're going to be looking to have you tell some of those stories when we gather. So our time may be even more inflated or even different because we're going to want to know what happened outside of our camp that was important that Jesus allowed you to experience. That's why we do this, folks. That's going to be a part of the harvest. That's when the bigger yield is one that we begin to experience. And that's something to get excited about.